So the other lecture we're going to look at is just kind of a quick one. I wanted to talk about process, like what is the animation process? Again, some of this may be stuff we've touched on in the past, but I think it's really some pretty helpful stuff. So what I wanted to show you is our workflow process, what we're going to be doing in class throughout these animations. That process can usually be broken down into reference, and then blocking plus or breakdowns, whichever one you want to call that, splining, and then polish. And then after polish, you render it, right? So I want to show you some images from different elements of that. So this is from Gajimata, one of the characters I animated for Civ 5. Let's do this. Where did it go? So some of you have seen this before. Bagyo, that is basically greetings or welcome. So this is when you meet Gajimata after you've already met him for the first time. This is a long time ago. It's 2012. So I shot a video reference of it, and these are two different takes of me saying that the way I wanted to say it. Yeah, go ahead.
It's off topic, but whenever you work for a company like that produces a game, do you get royalties, or is it just like a one-time thing? Or
Nope, they own it.
How does that work?
No, what happens, well, that's a good question. You're right, a little off topic, but I think it's fine to kind of go off topic. For me, I was working in-house, and so that is something that's important to recognize, is that they're paying me to make their stuff at that point, so they own the copyright for all of this, they own the content, and I just get paid a salary, or, yeah, sometimes it's an hourly rate. But yeah, the interesting thing about that too is if while you're working there, you say, oh hey, I have a great idea for a game. Now they own that game, right? So that's how that works. Like if they were funding you and paying you and giving you a location where you could create that, then they see that as their investment on that resource. And like sometimes you get some buy-in to it then. But yeah, for animation, it's just like that. Now currently, I still work for a couple of different game studios doing remote work. And so I'm not salary. How they do it is either hourly or per project. So, do what?
Like commission-based sort of?
Yeah, kind of. Basically, well, how mine usually works with Firaxis is they'll say, hey, we need this leader done. We expect that it's going to be 6 weeks worth of work or this many hours at what's your hourly rate. But really for them, like some studios don't really nickel and dime it that much. You just kind of, whatever their estimate of the hours are is what they would pay you. So it's kind of per project. And so I give them the hourly rate, they send me the work, and I bill them for it, and they just pay that rate. But again, they still own that. In that case, like I have to have my own software and stuff like that, so like I buy a version of mine. Whereas there, they would pay for it. So yeah, good question though. And I'll point out, like anytime you want to ask those kind of questions, like don't hesitate. Like I mean, if I do think it's going to sidetrack us too much, I'll be like, let's come back to that. But I'm like, if school's not for like learning new stuff, then I don't know what it's for. So again, what I'm doing here in this is I am trying to get into the head of Gajimata. He's the leader of Indonesia, or he was the leader of Indonesia, and he was very revered. So Gajimata was somebody like you couldn't be flippant about the way you treated this character. Like still to this day, people have statues of him all over Indonesia. So he needed to be like strong, but at the same time like kind of positive, I guess, like kind of noble. So I just wanted to have a little bit of motion in that, so I had him do a single step forward and a sort of a small welcoming hand gesture. It should feel strong, but it should also be like, come on in and have some tea or have some whatever I'm making, whatever. So I shot two different, actually how I shot this is I set up my camera and shot for probably 10 minutes of me saying Baguio over and over again in different ways. I settled on these two. These were the two that I thought got the performance the best. From there, we go to blocking. So, open with, let me set this to the, so, here's Baguio again.
Baguio.
So you'll see that what I'm looking for here is key poses. Right? So we just got through talking about poses. I'm looking for the most important ones from my reference, and then I'm exaggerating them. And then I'm exaggerating them enough to where they are clear on this character. Like the little things like the clothes he's wearing is different than the clothes I was wearing. Like our build is close-ish, so like that was nice. But like sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes I'm animating like tiny middle-aged women, right? Like and you have to still be able to extrapolate pose information from your reference and apply that to this character, right? And so again, I'm finding just the most important poses. I don't have an example of the breakdown pass in this, but you'll get to see sort of the polished version of this, sort of the final animation with everything in there. So thinking of overlapping action, thinking of follow through, thinking of arcs, thinking of lead and follow, and a lot more work making sure that I'm able to transition from each of those key poses to the next in an appealing way. And of course, the final version of this in the game engine actually still looks a little bit different as well, because it now has final lighting and stuff like that on it. So little things like the shadows in the mouth read differently now. So that's something else that's important to realize, is that your render does stuff to your animation as well. I will say, like some of the garment simulation stuff, the belt and the sash and everything, that wasn't done by me. That was probably Aaron Anderson who did simulation inside of. We were doing it in 3D Studio Max, and then kicked that out to the game engine.
So they would send you this model rig, and then you would animate your pieces and send that to the next person involved, and send it back to the company.
I would work under an art lead or an animation lead, and so I would send it back to him or her. The last one I worked with was Rachel. Oh, I can't remember the name. Anyway, so I would send it back to whoever that lead is for them to approve it, and then they internally would send it to. But if you're working in-house, what happens is you're all working from, like how we have the network. You're all working from a version of the network. It's called we were using Perforce. It's a subversion like checkout system. So you can't open a file unless you check it out. And so you right click on it and say check it out, and then you can make changes to it, but nobody else can. So and then you would resubmit it. Like I'd like to have a system like that here, but it would be a little hard to structure. Like, it would almost be like we would need a full-time person just keeping up with the Perforce structure system. But the cool thing about it is, like, if you make some changes to it and they're like, nope, that's not right, but you've already submitted those, you just revert back to a previous version. So, and so they always know that if it's been submitted, the version that's up on the server is the version they need to pull. So I would submit it, my lead would approve it, and then they would just download that from the server, the newest version from the server, and start working from there. So this has been exported, and this is playing in real time in a game engine, which means that the game engine is also doing some stuff to the animation. Sometimes it kind of messes up some of the little texture-y things that you have going on there. So there is a lot of back and forth between the game engine and Maya or Max, where you are making sure that what the player sees, or what the viewer sees, is what you want them to see. So you can't be like, but it looked good in Maya. Well, you can't ship them Maya, you have to ship them the game. So sometimes you have to go back and make it look over-exaggerated in Maya to work right in a game engine. So that's just some insight for anybody who's interested in game animation. Okay, I'll look at a couple more examples. This one is a long time ago. I think this was literally, when I was telling the story the other day, this was like maybe 4 months after that car wreck. There's a reason I'm trying to not move around too much, and that's because my knees still really hurt at that point. So this is video reference that I was shooting for one of my animation mentor shots. I shot a handful of different takes on them. They're all a little too long, but you'll get how that transitions into the blocking. So again, these are just the main key poses, right? Like, what is it that has to be there? And I could show this to someone who didn't see that reference, and hopefully they should be able to still understand what's happening in this shot, right? Like, our minds can make the leap for those areas where it's jumping from one pose to the other. The way we do that is with stepped mode, and I'll show you that later on. So blocking plus is basically that blocking pass plus some more poses, right? We have nailed down our key poses. Now we need those transitions in between, and we can guide the way those transitions happen with additional poses.
Just wanted to let you know, I just got a notification that Washington County schools are closing an hour early due to inclement weather.
Oh, it's not.
Yeah, it's coming down.
Oh, neat. Well, if we get out early, I'll have a good day. But if anybody needs to run for another reason, that's fine. Just let me know. And again, I'm recording these, so these will be up on the network. So the blocking, thanks for letting me know them. Blocking plus, again with all those extra breakdowns, I'm doing stuff like controlling how the arm eases in and out of the different poses, and I'm controlling some of that with additional poses. Now your blocking plus or your breakdown pass, we'll talk about that in more detail in about a week or so. Everybody does this pass differently. Some people put a lot of keyframes in here and like control a lot of the animation with keys rather than the graph editor. You still have to do some stuff in the graph editor, but they would rather do more work in posing than the graph editor. Recognize if you're doing that, you still have to consider every part of that. You have to put drag on the fingers in your pose, right? Other people will do fewer breakdown poses and a little bit more work in the graph editor. So it really depends on how you work. I think I'm sort of in that mid ground. I don't put this many breakdowns in my animations anymore because I feel a little bit more confident in the graph editor. Okay, so this is sort of the final animation. Now, I will tell you an interesting story. I named this one Final Play Blast 02. I still have 2 more videos to show you, if that tells you anything about that naming convention. This was not my final. This is just what I turned in for the final of that class. I still had a lot of issues. I was not happy with this. And this one's one I revised over and over and over again. And every time I would revise it, I would send it back to the mentor, and he would say, no, fix all of this and fix all of this. And I'm like, I worked hours on that, really? And I would just chop chunks out of it and revise it. So my plan for this piece at this point was to throw it away once that class was over with, right? I was like, this is not any good. I'm not going to use it. I did a couple more revisions for it later on, and it's not as much. There's a couple of other like small things you'll see on it. So I did this as a revision just to, I think I fixed some timing and some arc stuff. And even though I thought it was terrible, it actually ended up winning an award for that class. So for my graduating class, this was like voted like one of the better pieces, which dumbfounded me because I thought the number of times I revised it meant it sucked, right? The number of times I had to try it again was a bad thing. And so I think that it's good for you to remember that sometimes you just need some distance from your work. Sometimes you need to just like step away from it for a few weeks, and when you come back to it, you might like it more than you think you did, right? Because what you can't see is the actual quality of it because you're blinded by all of those hours of work you've put into it, right? The final version of this, I actually did another revision of this a couple months ago, well, about 6 months ago, and re-rendered it to be full size. So it's a little bit better now. I think some of the arcs and poses are a little cleaner now. So there we go. A couple others we'll go through a little faster. This push animation. I don't actually have reference for this, but I had reference for this. What I had was multiple minutes of me pushing things differently, and I just pulled different pushes, different pieces of reference, and tried to combine them together. So this isn't all from a single take of reference. This is from multiple pieces of reference, and I just sort of skipped in between the two. That was the blocking pass. This is blocking plus, where you can see much more of the poses. But you'll see like the arcs are not nearly as clean in this yet. So little things like, watch how the character jumps back after he's like pulling the leg. So like right here, the jump doesn't have like as nice of an arc, right? So this is where I got to on blocking plus. All of that other stuff that I have to add into it, I did in splining, which is in the graph editor. So again, with the graph editor, I'm making sure that my arcs are cleaner. There's still a couple little things left on this, like the arm kind of stretches weird, and like some of the arcs aren't perfect. But that's what I would be working on the splining, is refining those changes, refining those arcs. So now you'll see the arc of that jump back is a little better. Actually, one of the revisions I did was to make that even bigger. So like that's one of the things that kept changing on this one, is how big of a jump back was it. So, now this is one of my more recent ones, and again, I want to show this one because this was a character that was nothing like me. This is Tamara the Great. She is a 60-year-old queen, right? And so I still use myself as reference. That's not always the case, but in this case, so you can see me, like, I don't know if you can hear it, I'm listening to the audio and I'm acting it out. One of the things I did, because I couldn't, like there are certain elements that I'm not going to be able to execute well physiologically, right? So one of the things I did in this was I tried to limit a lot of her motions to her hands, and that was also in the character, is that I wanted her to seem like she could wipe you off of the planet with a small hand gesture, right? Like the way does anybody watch the Gilmore Girls? Like my idea was Emily Gilmore if she had an enormous army, right? That was what I was going for on this. So that's probably the biggest motion she makes there, is that last one I did. So from the ref, this is the one I focused on for the declare war. So one of the biggest motions she makes. So you can see the stepped mode of this. Her eyes are closed, but that's a rigging issue, not an animation issue. So you can see me sort of extracting those key poses from the last one and getting those in there. Now, I think what people mistakenly do when they're blocking is they start doing like straight ahead animation. Like they're like, oh, the next pose I must be this 1-2 frames later where her foot moves just a little bit. And like sometimes I'll do the very first key pose and then the very last key pose. See where she's going all the way from and all the way to. And then I'll just start breaking that down. But you can also do it from major beats. Like, so to me, her major beat is she does this like this upward gesture, this look over, this step forward gesture. So she has like 3 beats to this, right? And so like I would break it up into that and make sure that I was hitting the key poses through that. Sort of the, that's what it looks like in stepped mode when we're just looking at the keyframes. If you want to see, like, this is what Maya does to that. Like, this is how Maya sees those key poses. And so even though that's, like, it feels like everything's moving, there's so much that has not been addressed. And when we watch it in, like, this smooth transition mode like this, it's kind of bad for us to do that because we forget what we haven't addressed yet. So that's one of the reasons I work in stepped. So the final animation in Maya, you can see my reference. I'm going to show you how to do this where we can bring the reference into Maya. So this is what the final piece looks like in Maya. And then finally, this is what she looks like in the engine. So, all right. I am exhausted. Let's take, so this class ends at 2:05, is that right? So let's go take us like a 10-minute break, and I think we can still get to that last little bit I want to look at later. When we come back, we're going to be doing some sketching and some sort of live figure drawing stuff. Not live, like live in class. Right. So it's 12:58 right now. Let's come back at like 10 or 1:10, something like that, and then we'll start it back. Assuming we don't get snowed out.
It doesn't seem to be snowing. It's like too wet out there for it to snow. But it is coming down pretty hard.
Yeah, it takes a while.
Right, about the
Oh, where is that?
yeah. Like you can't click on, you can't disable it. It just forces you to restart.
No, we're going to re-image the computers sometime soon. Hopefully that'll fix it.
Oh, okay. So like I was like working on some computer stuff last night, and it just popped up right there. And I was like, I moved to another computer and I started working on there, and then it popped up and it said like your computer will restart, and now I was like, I can't do this because like I can't keep track of like what we're again all the time.
Yeah. What I would say, can you go ahead and save it, let it restart, and just do it again?
Yeah, it will like do it again. It's like whoever's updating it, it's like they're not updating it properly because when it updates, it says this so-and-so failed